People also get confused by that.
Yeah, it always does that to me too. I always have to hit reload, and then it's like, oh, okay, now it's back. Yeah. So this resolution, I was originally when I wrote it up, I was writing it for Michael Vineyard because he was going all in on how Israel is completely in the right, Palestine is completely in the wrong, and I was like, no, there are pros and cons to both of their arguments. And so I made this for him, and then apparently a couple of you guys from the other side have stepped in and had some thoughts on it. So I did post just a moment ago something. I guess they just disappeared because we just started a debate. But I had posted a couple of links about some of the things that I have been looking at. But one of the things that I think that you can look at is if you just go to Wikipedia, the Palestinian political violence. There are pages and pages worth of acts of violence committed by Palestine. And obviously this is not to say, therefore they deserve to be killed. But that is to say that when Israel says we have a legitimate reason to fight, they are protesting what they perceive as unjust attacks from Palestine. And Palestine, when they commit these acts of violence, are protesting what they consider to be unjust acts of violence from Israel. It goes both ways. But as long as they keep doing it to each other, it's a vicious circle. And each side says, oh, they're making me do it. No, they're making me do it. And so it keeps going back and forth. One of the links that I also posted was from Ethical Culture, the Society of Bergen County. And it was for the author of that piece was from the Middle East. And so they were talking about how both sides need to recognize that the narrative that they're listening to is intentionally flawed. Like, Palestine intentionally omits information in order for them to be able to say, no, the Jews are the problem, whereas Israel intentionally omits information so that they can say, no, the terrorists, Hamas is the problem. But the fact of the matter is there is fault on both sides. And each side has had opportunities, as time has gone on, to live in peace. And yet, because the tensions are so high, they each harken back to prior perceived injustices and say, no, they committed injustice against me, therefore I must fight back. As long as that cycle continues, there will be fault on both sides, and we can't say that one side or the other is solely responsible for the conflict. So I'd be interested to see why you would think one side can be solely responsible.
I don't think one side is more responsible than if you're looking at like the whole religious debate. Like, can you be 100% certain that God exists or doesn't exist? I don't think you have to look at it in this sort of absolute way. But I think my chief argument here, I think where our disagreement is going to be, is that Israel is a dominant force, and that's what all these arguments are really centered around. A lot of what I talk about usually revolves around the fact that Israel is a dominant force and they control 90% of the land. I didn't realize. People like you have your Michael Vineyard, and I actually respect Michael, and I really enjoyed my debate with him. But what I imagine for him, his values are that he's a conservative Christian, and he probably, he hears this a lot, and it's part of his beliefs and his values. So I thought it's different that you and I can have this conversation because we're not Christian conservatives, but Michael is, and I know that you, I can see that you care about it, and usually the way people look at this is they think there's going to be some sort of two-state solution, but it's interesting that we're talking about this now, and as I get to that idea of a two-state solution, because this is actually when Trump's Middle East peace envoy, Jared Kushner, is going to go to Israel to lay out what his peace plan is, what Trump's peace plan is going to be, and this is all kind of going to start to unravel right now, and and I think it's how do we look at this situation now? Because when we talk about the title ongoing, there's a lot of history, and that's, and so you're right that there is there's a narrative. It becomes kind of what's like a tale of two narratives with this history, where one side says I believe in this history, and the other side says I believe in that history, and it just goes nowhere, and it's silly. So I think with Israel controlling 90% of the land, that that's why I would say that they're the dominant force, that they have the upper hand. They you could say that their atrocities are worse. They have all the power, but even then, it just becomes the echo chamber of this thing.
Well, I would agree with you that Israel currently has the power, but that doesn't mean that they are necessarily the bad guys. Just because you're winning a war doesn't mean you're the bad guys. And realistically, so far, Israel has been essentially winning the war. They're taking over more land. If we're going to call it a war, which we really should just call it straight up, it's a war, and that's what's going on. And they are winning at it. There's this sort of diplomacy sort of thing is, and they only sort of half call it a full-on war. But if this was thought of as just a regular Germany versus France in World War II, well, Israel is Germany. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that one side or the other is correct. Just because they're winning a war doesn't mean that they are the bad guys. Sometimes, if we want to call it the good guys can win a war. Maybe it's entirely possible that Israel are the good guys and that they're winning the war. And if you asked anyone in Israel, they would believe they are the good guys. They're fighting against injustice. And the reason why they believe that is because, like we kind of mentioned this, there's narratives on both sides, and they each believe their own narrative. And each narrative, I would contend, intentionally omits options, intentionally omits possibilities, and each side has had opportunities to come to a two-state solution, and each side has intentionally gone back on that. One of the other things that Israel can point to as a reason why they would think that they are the good guys is the fact that Hamas has intentionally used women and children as suicide bombers, and they have intentionally targeted civilians in Israel. Hamas is also supported by many in Palestine because they're believed to be the fighters for the country themselves. Now, I'm not saying Israel are the good guys. I'm really not saying that. I'm simply saying that there are two narratives that are being offered here, and each narrative is only partially correct. But there is enough partial correctness to each narrative that I can understand why both sides would say, no, they're the bad guys, we are the good guys. Because of that, I don't think either side is responsible. Actually, both sides are responsible, but neither side is solely responsible.
I don't think you need to look at either narrative at all. I think the best way to look at this is what it looks like now. So let's just go back a couple of years. Kerry left office saying that it is one state. So the idea of a two-state solution, he says it's dead. He says it is one state. Trump enters office. He agrees with Kerry and tells Netanyahu that his policy will be to treat it as one state, that it pretty much is one state. And the reason for this is because of the settlements in the West Bank, and they're completely built around Jerusalem. So basically, they've already marked the territory that they want. But and so of course, and then I'll go ahead and finish this. The narrative is because I want to ask you a question. Then of course you have Nikki Haley. Then he actually meets with Abbas. So Trump's camp thinks that the Palestinians, they never talked to the United States or Israel at all, even though they did it on the front White House lawn before, but they don't think it ever happened. But so Trump and Abbas, they've actually met. But then what happens next? Of course, they cut the United Nations aid, and then but the big thing, of course, they move it to Jerusalem. This slaughter happens at the same time. The people who are protesting, they happen to get slaughtered at the exact same time, just by coincidence. 60 people die who are protesting that. It's in total violation of all international laws. And then, of course, our Nikki Haley blocks the UN from doing anything about it, and is, I think, the only person, if I'm not mistaken, or at least about the only person to vote against the resolution that did pass, which just said that it was condemned it. It didn't really do anything, of course. And now the U.S. is going to back out of the Human Rights Council as part of the Haley Doctrine because they say that because there's all this bias. So one side is in control. They control everything, and that's why people have this whole argument about apartheid. Is it apartheid or not? And the South Africans consulted them on it, and they sold them nuclear weapons. But let me yeah, they have met on the White House lawn. But the thing is, why? Let me go ahead and this is my question. Why do you think you think that there was an opportunity for the Palestinians to have peace? Like, what do you think that looked like? Why do you think that deal fell through?
Well, there have been numerous options that have been offered through diplomacy throughout the years. Different treaties have been offered. Sometimes they've even been agreed to, and yet
agreed to a little bit.
Which one?
They've been agreed to a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and then one side or the other does something. Either a rogue missile from Palestine goes into Israel, or Israel invades into the Gaza Strip. Either way, each one has happened, and then of course each side rears back up the tensions. So they've had options, and yet they haven't been able to keep the peace. So that's why I would say is again something that's going on both sides. But I would ask you a question though. If you think that Israel is solely responsible for the ongoing conflict, does that mean you think there is nothing that Palestine could have done to prevent this? That Palestine has done everything right, and that nothing they've done has been over the line?
I don't think they can really do anything right or wrong. The Israelis, they have a plan. The only because the borders that we have are from the 1948 peace plan that fell through, and they've always said that because it's Zionism, it's this idea that they have this God-given right to this land. They actually believe it's the same way it is in the Bible, where it says that they control a greater area than what was given to them. And they have all these policies that they want more territory.
Right, but both sides believe that. But that's why you have the conflict. You have the Islamic side in Palestine, and you have the Jewish side in Israel, and each of them believe, for religious or cultural reasons, that they have a right, an ingrained right, to more land than they actually possess. Would you agree that's part of the narrative on both sides?
Well, the thing with the Palestinians is, for starters, I mean, this I know you're not trying to use like a straw man argument, but it kind of becomes one in a way. Not that I know you're not. I don't think this is what you're going for, but this is the way that I look at this is the way that I'm looking at. I'm losing my train of thought here. The way that I'm looking at it is that there's the Palestinian. So they're not asking for any more land than they lost in the beginning, but even that's not going to happen. Is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to think of the best way to explain that. Like they want at the very most to go back to not even the 1948 borders, which are the legal borders, or the 1967 borders. They really just want to negotiate something that's one state. But even now, they're going to look at a peace plan that's it. And actually the big thing, because there's a lot of isn't actually the land itself, it's the people, because under the Fourth Geneva Convention, was written because of the Holocaust, they have a right to that private property no matter what. So if they can't get it back physically, they're supposed to be compensated for it. And that's the reason why it's the march to return, where we're going to cross the fence and all this stuff, because it's their private property, and they're just going, like, the idea is it's their march home, or like you have to, like, this is what they like. So the legality of it is that they would have more land. So the Palestinians aren't trying to, but see, the thing is, one side, the Israeli side, the dominant side, they are building colonies in the West Bank. They did pull out of Gaza, and they control all of Jerusalem now and all around Jerusalem, as well as parts of Lebanon and into Syria with the Golan Heights, which they annexed, which is the thing I forgot to mention that Trump, what he's going to do next is he's going to say that he recognizes the Golan Heights as part of Israel, even though it's actually part of Syria. And people don't talk about that very often, even though it almost started a war and all this stuff, a really bad war. So it's a problem for the United States. But yeah, anyway, what I'm saying is the Palestinians, they're not asking for any more land than they lost in the beginning. But I'm not assuming that's that would be an equality of outcome that isn't going to happen. I think that you got to look at it as one state, and the plan that they're going to look at that Kushner is going to bring over there. We've actually seen it before. It was written by an Israeli general whose name I won't pronounce right, so I'm not going to bother to say it. But basically, they're going to say that Gaza is the Palestinian state, and they're going to say that the Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt, that they'll have that's where their airport and that sort of thing will be. And Netanyahu actually wants to push his actual plan would be for them to have their own state just in the Sinai. So that's probably what they're going to ask. They're probably going to, as far as the West Bank goes, they would make the people who live in the West Bank citizens of Israel, but they still wouldn't have the same rights. They'd have more rights than they do now, but they still wouldn't have the same rights. So that's what they're gonna throw at them. The whole plan, I posted a link up to it. It says, because the big thing is refugees, and so basically it says you can go through the whole list that's on there, but basically it says all these things are not going to happen. So this is our way of getting around that. And like all these plans that we've seen, they don't, because the problem with this is there's already too many people there to begin with, and it's supposed to be an ethnic state. There's already too many people there to begin with, and it's basically divided in half between population. So, but one side actually for people to have equal rights, it says in Israeli law for them to have equal rights that it has to be Jewish, so it has to have an ethnic majority. And people always say, well, you can't have, like, they say something about a call to racism or something like that. The thing is that's actually the second clause that's written in this confusing way, where I can't say that people who like say it. So I have the right to vote in Israel, but I can't say that people in the West Bank should have a right to vote because it's a call to racism, because it would overthrow it being a Jewish state. The people who live in Israel, they actually think that it's a lot of them, no matter what, that the majority of them. There's a poll in a book. It's really good. It's called A Tale of Two Narratives. It says the majority of them believe that once they achieve this magic number of this ethnic majority, that they'll just annex everything, and that's actually what they're going for. But it's always been this sort of backdoor policy of where there's supposed to be a two-state solution, but one side takes more and more and more, and there really isn't anything the other side can do about it, because they don't have. I mean, in the 1948 war, for example, it was all air power. The same thing with 1967. They attacked first. They had all the planes. They had more. They just had a better air military, and that was until the Soviets came in and supported Egypt, and then we got Egypt on our side. But anyway, I'm just rambling now. So does that answer your question?
Okay, so I have two questions to follow up on that then. The first question I would have would be, if Great Britain invades the United States, are they in the right?
I mean, do they have a reason? I mean, I don't know why they would invade the United States. Of course, we'd have a right to defend ourselves.
They deserve the United States land. The United States rebelled and stole land from Great Britain. So if Great Britain wants to stake their claim to the land that was stolen from them unjustly, do they have a right to invade the United States and take back that land?
Well, I think you're confused about the legality here, because Israel, they're saying that they can have this state. They're saying they can have a Jewish state. The authority that they're going to, that they have that from, is the UN, and the UN under the 1948 plan, which is supposed to be a peace plan, says that, and I've already mentioned this, but it says that the Palestinians also have a state, and it draws these lines, and they were never followed. And it says that they're both ethnic states. Actually, it says that they're both. So that's why maybe you have some Palestinians who also believe in that. I don't believe it, in any ethnic state, but they actually have this is what the legal document says it has to be. So even when I'm saying like it's one state, like I'm breaking away from. I don't have that's the problem with it, is that I don't have a strong legal argument. And usually, I mean, that would be like that's why it's always the go-to argument, but it's actually this two-state idea, but it's not going to happen at this point because it's impossible.
Okay, sure, but my point was simply that just because Palestine is fighting for land that they believe is theirs doesn't mean that they're going to have the ability to do that. In the same way that Britain, if they wanted to come in and take back the land that was stolen from them in the United States today, isn't able to legally do that without being seen as the aggressors, and they would be the aggressors. The second question that I would have for you there would be, would you agree that when Palestine resorts to violence against women and children, and oftentimes intentionally against women and children, and using women and children to carry out violence, would you agree that exacerbates the response from Israel?
When do they use women and children? They don't do that. Look, Israel, they blew up in the 2014 Gaza war. They blew up two kids that were playing soccer on a beach. They just killed a 19-year-old girl who was acting as a medic, and they posted a video up of her throwing the gas canister back and tried to make her look like she was some wacko terrorist because she threw the gas canister back before they shot her dead trying to help somebody as a medic. I mean, they in the West Bank, they actually burned a baby alive, and the person was only given probation for doing that. So I mean, yeah, I mean, the war crimes here are the Palestinians, like, they don't have a military. You're talking about Israel. They have a really strong military. They have the United States at the UN. They have everybody. The Palestinians, they have, what do they have? They have, like, what, Iran? They don't have Iraq anymore, right? They don't have Libya. No one cares about them. And what's the Trump administration going to do? The Trump administration is going to try to get them to side with the Saudis, who are probably, like, who are just as bad, if not worse.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There are instances of atrocities by Israel as well, and there are limited instances in which Hamas has utilized women and children. But one of the things that they have done consistently, and actually, I think a study found that several hundred, not every year, but about 100 per year over the last 15 or so years, Israeli citizens have been killed in attacks by Hamas, and those are not combatants. Those aren't military. Those are civilians. And would you agree that when your civilians are being killed as a government, you then would be incentivized to respond with violence?
So the numbers are really low. Actually, I mean, they can't really do much with the rockets. Even sending kites and these burning kites and stuff over, that's actually not. You can't actually be considered an enemy combatant for doing that. I mean, of course, I don't think they should be doing this stuff, but I think the big thing you have to look at here is that Hamas, they're not the totality of the Palestinian government at all, and the PA is actually the dominant authority, the government authority, and it's the total political. I mean, like a political opposite of Hamas on the in every way. But the thing is, they're actually trying to join together, and they're actually trying to so they can negotiate peace together, and Israel's trying to stop them from doing that. So you always hear about Hamas and they're the bad guys when they don't have a government that's living together, and then the people that they're supposed to be negotiating with aren't even Hamas. And I mean, even when you look at the numbers, I mean, no matter how many rockets they send, again, the thing with the rockets is that we're giving Israel all this money for aid, and that justifies us giving the aid. If they work, there's arguments that they work, and there's arguments that they don't work, but they're not. We've spent a lot of money, we've already spent a lot of money, so the rockets can't really do anything anyway. It's basically like a bunch of Yahoo militia guys, and like what they're doing. It's not so much of like the centralized thing around a government. I mean, they're angry. I mean, the unemployment rate in Gaza is ridiculous. I'm sure it is in the West Bank too. And even they have nothing better to do. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to go on so long.
It's all good. So basically, your argument there boils down to, because Hamas is really shitty at effective combat, therefore it's not a big deal what they're doing. Even though they're sending rockets, it's not a big deal. Even though they're killing an average of about 100 Israeli citizens per year, it's not a big deal. Because
I'd like to see the stats on that. I don't think they're there's no way.
Okay. They're actually worse stats that I was looking at. Let me see here. Yeah. Let's see.
The
over
number's
40.
a lot higher. I mean, just look at on the other side. No matter what, Israel's killing way more kids than Hamas or the Palestinians are. I mean, look at the 2014 war and how many kids died. I think like 100 people died, and Hamas. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying they don't have. They're actually good at. They've actually were really good at fighting off the invasion in 2014. So I wouldn't say that they're really not that bad. It's just they don't have a way. They don't have a way to attack offensively. They don't have jet fighters, and they don't have ballistic missiles or any of the things that the United States or a Navy or anything the United States would have. They don't have that stuff. Like it's literally just trying to fling. It's literally just flinging stuff over the fence because that's all. That's like all they can do as far as an offensive attack. And they try to provoke them so much recently to fire these rockets, and they won't do it because they're getting smarter than that. They know that the best thing they're actually just they're playing Israel to do this because they're setting the stage for them to screw up so everyone can see how how they're this dominant force and how they have the upper hand and their real goal is, which is to get all the Palestinians out of the West Bank into Gaza and the Sinai.
All right, so let's say that Hamas never shot a rocket. Let's say that there was no violence. Let's say that they turned into amazing, perfectly innocent people who never do anything wrong, ever. They're amazing, fantastic civilians. Is it your contention that Israel would have acted in exactly the same way that they have?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, somebody who's a medic and gets shot in the leg or gets shot down trying to help somebody. I mean, how could you be acting more? How could you be acting in better merit than that? And I mean, these people who are getting killed at this fence, they're not Hamas. They're just protesters. And I mean, they've killed journalists. They've gassed the journalists who are over there. It's all on video. These people are just people who are protesting. They're not Hamas any more than the people who are standing outside of an abortion clinic or the Republican Party are vice versa. I mean, they're not. It's not because they're part of a party. And this idea that they're being paid to go there, it's ridiculous. Like someone's going to give me $100, give my family $100 so I can go to a protest and get shot. I mean, how silly is that? It's just as dumb as this idea that this lady she threw the gas canister, so she must be a terrorist. She threw the gas canister back. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I mean, if you listen to the Israelis, I was looking at this. There were studies in Israel that said that 80% of those at the wall were part of Hamas or were terrorists, which personally I don't believe those studies. But again, that's the whole thing about the narrative here. The narrative that Israel is working off of is these are the terrorists.
Well, according to Haaretz, there were 3 people who were terrorists on the 15th.
Let me follow up on this a little bit. So you seem to think that Israel, you really haven't shown any proof for this, but you're just saying Israel would have done exactly the same thing even if they didn't face any retribution from Hamas. However, if you look at the Israeli news, if you look at Netanyahu, if you look at what they say the reason why they do these things, the reason why they encroach on Palestine, they claim, is because they are being attacked by Palestine. So as long as Palestine keeps doing what they think is self-defense, Israel will keep doing what they think is self-defense, and the cycle continues. So I don't see how you can make this claim that Palestine is completely in the right when Israel tells us the reason they're doing this is because they think they're being attacked. That's why Michael Vineyard and those sorts of guys think, oh, Israel's completely in the right. They have to defend themselves. And there is, as you have seen, an extremely pro-Zionist movement to try to defend Israel, and they think that they are defending them from these horrific attacks, which I would agree with you, aren't as big of a deal as Israeli supporters try and say they are. But that isn't to say that they're meaningless. They are perceived as threats in Israel, in Jerusalem. They are perceived as threats by the Israeli people, and they are utilized by the Israeli government to justify military action against Palestine. This is why I say there is blame on both sides.
It's a war. We can agree that it's a war. But the thing is, in this war, one side has a dominant military force, and the other side is just some guerrilla fighters. And even then, it's a minority. It's not an organized military.
If ISIS commits acts of terrorism, in a war against the United States, does that mean that ISIS is now the good guys? Because they're up against a dominant force, so that there's nothing ISIS can do against the power of the United States. Does that mean that they have carte blanche to do whatever they want?
Well, I mean, it would depend on the legal framework. I don't think ISIS is doing anything within legal framework where you could argue that they have a right to to property or the.
They claim they do. The whole reason ISIS is established is because they believe that they are establishing this caliphate that is part of their religion. That ISIS believes that they are establishing the jihad, the official jihad of Islam.
But it wasn't taken from them, though. It wasn't property that was taken from them.
Well, they say it was. They say that it has been taken, and they must take it back. It's literally.
Is it a legal claim or is it a claim to God?
It's kind of a shitty legal claim, but they think it's a legal claim. Same thing.
But I mean, they're making this. They're saying that God, this is an Islamic state because of. They're not saying under the Fourth Geneva Convention, I either have a right to return to my house or you have to compensate me for it, right?
So let's say that we just for the sake of argument, let's say Palestine is completely in the correct about their claims. Okay, they're completely correct about the Geneva Convention. They're completely correct about everything that Israel is encroaching on them. All of that, Israel has no argument whatsoever. If they are completely correct, does that justify targeting civilians?
They're not really targeting civilians as much as you think. I mean, they just don't have a way to. They don't have a like. It's not a. They can't aim it to target anywhere, and it's not really. So it's not a unified government that's doing it. It's basically some yahoos that are doing it. It's like Timothy McVeigh or somebody.
So if I take a gun and swirl it around in a crowd and shoot, is that a reasonable thing for me to do, or is that endangering the lives of those around?
Well, a crowd isn't a war zone, right?
Well, I mean, I pretty much immediately would turn it into one. Also, you know what else isn't a war zone? Civilian life. It's not supposed to be a war zone, but when Hamas sends something at a city, it immediately becomes a war zone. That's exactly the point. It's the same thing as if I swing a gun around. If I do it so irrationally, I turn the area around me into a war zone. In the same way, you see this with mass shootings. It's the same thing as a war zone. When someone goes in with a gun and just blindly shoots, that is a war zone. Those people are an immediate threat. It might not be like the same sort of war zone as combatant on one side, combatant on the other side.
But it's not a declared war zone though, where international law just doesn't seem to apply because the UN isn't going to do anything about it.
The response then from Israel is to treat it as an act of war and continue this war. So I don't see how you can say that this has no impact on how the two countries, well, I guess Palestine isn't really a country, but on how the two nations treat each other, when clearly what Palestine does absolutely has retributive action. Would you agree that Israel claims what they are doing is retributive?
Of course they do, but they don't have a good claim though. I mean, let's go back to this thing at the Gaza fence. For them to win their argument in court, they actually have to say that it's a violent riot. It doesn't matter if Hamas are terrorists. It says in the 33rd article of the Fourth Geneva Convention, it doesn't matter if they're terrorists. They're shooting medics. The people are not. They're not armed. They're not combatants. They're just protesters, and they're shooting them dead. And this includes children. Let's look at the Gaza war. They completely carpet bombed the whole thing. They killed thousands of people. They killed thousands of women and children. They basically, the whole idea was to destroy the entire thing. And now they're telling them that the Saudis have to bail them out. They have the entire thing barricaded. They've had it barricaded since 2007 anyway. They control everything that goes in and out of there. The thing is, like, and the other thing that I think you're like, they're a dominant force. Their war crimes are worse. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Like they're killing more people. They're killing medics. They're killing journalists. The Palestinians aren't killing medics and journalists, are they? They're not. I mean, maybe this rocket hit some kid's house, and that's not. I mean, I don't like that, but they didn't. It was just a rocket that somebody fired, that some Yahoo fired. It wasn't a F-16 that they bought from the United States that just dropped the target a bomb there. It wasn't a drone where they know they can go. We can go look at the drone footage, and you can watch the second that thing explodes, they can call it off. They know that they're not actually loading the rockets or whatever. It's just something for some gas canisters for a business, but they know it. They just kill them anyway. I mean, it's a war. It's a bloody ethnic war.
In war, do you get the ability to target cities randomly without knowing where your weapon will fall?
Well, I mean, it's pretty. I mean, I'm saying it's not. It's random, but I mean, they can. It's not like a ballistic missile, but they have an idea. They're firing it in this direction, so they know that this is where their nuclear facility is. They try to shoot it. They try to shoot it that way or something like that.
It's random.
It's just for a headline more than anything. And they're getting smarter at it. They really try to provoke them during all these protests. I mean, everyone's surprised that there's. We could probably look at the news and there's some sort of bombing going on in Gaza right now because they try to provoke these rockets because they want that to be the headline that they fired rockets, not that some protester. There was a protester who was killed today, actually. Not that some protester was killed today or something like that. That's the headline that they want. So they try to provoke. They actually go in and bomb these areas and try to provoke those attacks to get that headline.
But you're agreeing that it's random. And if it's random, that means
it's not completely random. What I said is that they can't target it the way that like somebody who's a drone operator, they can see up until the thing explodes, or like with an F-16 or anything like that. They can just say, well, this is the Dimona is west of here, so we'll fire it west, and we'll try to, and so we can try to. But there's really no way, like they don't have technology to do that. They're just it's in that direction. So they can aim it a little bit, but they don't have. It's not like they have a better excuse than this airline than these Israeli pilots who say I won't do this mission or because I would have to kill kids or now they're coming forward and saying that they committed all these war crimes and they have post-traumatic stress and they want people to know there's actually a group of ex-IDF soldiers who are saying that now. I can't remember their name. So yeah, it's worse because it's through a military and they have a better means to target, and it's obvious that they're doing that, like with snipers or the bombing in Gaza, as opposed to just some yahoo on his rocket or his kite or whatever. And I mean, yeah, there are 3 people actually. I know the 60 people who died on the 15th, on May 15th during the Jerusalem opening. Yes, 3 of them were terrorists. It's sure they could have shot them. I mean, it's terrorists and they were committing a terrorist attack, or they were actually using violence, like they were trying to do something violent. So I'm not saying that some of them are, but the 57 people who died who weren't, and that includes journalists and medics and all that stuff. So it's worse.
So, all right, I would agree with you that Israel is more effective. They have more money. They have more military weapons. They're the dominant force. I absolutely agree. I don't think that means in any way that therefore the underdogs are the good guys. Just because you're the underdog doesn't mean you're the good guys. Especially when you even talked about this. They don't really have a established government. So the closest thing they have to a government is Hamas. So a terrorist organization is literally the closest thing that they have to an established government, and that is the closest thing they have to a military.
You forget about the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority they have an authority to have a government through the United States, and that's the Palestinian Authority, and that they have an elected leader through the Palestinian Authority. So no, and that's actually who they would negotiate with, not Hamas. And that's what would need to happen for them to have a unified government. And they're trying to do this, but Israel, as I've already said, Israel doesn't want them to have a unified government. Is Hamas and the Fatah party, which is the PA, they're trying to get together and create a unified party. But Israel's trying to stop them from doing that. And it would be a peaceful party, and it does recognize Israel, and it doesn't want to go back to 1948 borders and all that stuff. So they're actually coming forward saying that they want something. They either want a 2-state solution, which is doable, or they don't lose Jerusalem, they don't lose the West Bank, or they just want to have one state. And this is what I think needs to happen, and what it is, and this is why it's not about 2 narratives and about who's right, who's wrong. It just needs to be one state. There are people who say like they don't know that I'm into this issue or whatever, or like some girl I'm dating or whatever, and I know that that's their bias because they're saying something like I'm Jewish or whatever, and then I just say, well, I just think it should be one state, and then we see it the same way. So it's, I mean, does that make sense?
If there was one state, sure. Although I'm surprised that you would say that Israel is the bad guys when if there's one state, Israel will obviously be that one state. I don't know. I don't know how you can have a one state solution any other way. What's your solution?
Yeah, it probably would have to be called Israel, but I mean, then the problem is that it has to have an ethnic majority. So, I mean, yeah, basically, I mean, I'm not saying that would have, I don't think it would have to have an ethnic majority, but you would have to give up that idea of it needing to have an ethnic majority somehow in some way, and then just give everyone the same rights, basically. And that's the solution that I'm calling for. It just because the problem was divide. The problem with this is dividing land to begin with. So you stop dividing the land, and then you don't have a problem anymore.
Well, there seems to be a contradiction in that. In that, even if there was one state, you would still have all of the people within Palestine, the ones who believe in this concept of that this is their land, it belongs to them, who would still be willing to fight for it. That's literally what's happening right now, even though it isn't clarified as a one state. They would still do that, whether there was a two-state solution or a one-state solution. And there's
American Indians are still saying that stuff too, and it really, American Indians are still saying that they would fight, that they want to have a separate state outside of the United States, and all this stuff. I mean, I'm saying that. I mean that they should. I'm not saying anything negative about that, but I just mean like they're still saying the same thing, like they want to have their own state and stuff like that.
so
So it's not gonna. I mean, there isn't. I'm not calling for an equality of outcome. Because that's what a two-state solution would be. I'm saying you have to stop dividing the land, and then you don't have a problem anymore.
So because Israel are the bad guys, therefore, and because they're dominant and because they've completely owned this war, therefore, your solution is to give them all the land, to just let them win.
The Native Americans, I mean, what was their? I mean, of course, they had to give up all the land. I mean, yeah, they would have. I mean, I'm assuming it would be something like that, where they would get to keep part of the West Bank and Gaza. So they would still have a right. They would keep some. They would keep the land they have now. The thing is that they would have resources, because with the solution that they're being given is worse. They would have to go into the Sinai, and they would lose all the West Bank. They would have to, and Jerusalem, and they'd have to go into Gaza. So it would be better if they could just, yeah, they could. I'm saying that if they would probably keep parts of the West Bank. They would probably keep parts of Gaza. I'm not saying it has to be an ethnic state, but let's face it, there probably would be a majority of Arabs and a majority of Jews in different areas, and that would probably be the makeup for a while. But that's really the reason this is the only solution, because there's only 2 minutes left, is because it's overpopulated. And it actually proves that the effects of overpopulation are real indirectly, because it's overpopulated and it's split evenly. So there's no way for them. Their way is actually to try to have all these. It doesn't matter. Both sides are doing this. Or their birth rates are really high. So there's too many people there. So it's really the only thing that can happen, unless you force everyone out, which is what Israel's plan, that they're going to pitch, what Jared Kushner is going to pitch. And this is what Abbas won't even talk to him about, is everyone out of the West Bank and into Gaza and into the Sinai. I think there can be a better outcome than that. There's only a minute left, so I'll let you finish.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I don't disagree with your solution. I mean, it sounds plausible, but I don't think that has any bearing on the question of which side would be at fault. And what I was addressing here with this resolution is the fact that both sides continually say, no, he did it. He's the one who's at fault. No, he did it. He's the one who's at fault. And the fact of the matter is, both sides have committed atrocities against the other. And I'm sure you're right. I don't disagree with you that Israel has done more to Palestine than Palestine has done to Israel. But at the same time, Israel does have a legitimate right to say these people are intentionally randomly firing rockets that they don't know exactly where they're going to land. They don't even have very good control over where they're going to land, which is why they're taking out a reasonably high amount of our civilians. And it's not as many civilians as Israel is taking out, but it still is civilians who are being taken out. Israel has a right to be upset about that, and just like Palestine has a right to be upset about it. Both sides have legitimate grievances against the other.
Thanks for the debate.
For sure, man. Thanks.